My name is Eula Anderson, and I was 61 when my husband decided to end 15 years of marriage like he was sending back a dish he didn't like. It was our anniversary dinner: grilled salmon, lemon butter, the same restaurant with the same dim lighting that always made people look kinder than they really were. The kind of place where the servers spoke softly, like they were protecting everyone's secrets. I'd worn a dress I hadn't worn in months. He'd put on the navy blazer I bought him 2 years ago, because even on the day he planned to gut me, he still wanted the part where he looked like the good guy. Across the table, Mark set his fork down with that careful, deliberate motion he used when he wanted something to feel official, like he was about to read a verdict. "I'm going back to my ex-girlfriend," he said. No preamble, no "we need to talk," no shaky breath, just the sentence, clean and cold. I blinked once, not because I didn't understand, because my brain automatically tried to correct it, the way it corrects a typo. Like surely he meant he'd seen her, or he'd run into her, or he'd spoken to her, and it stirred up old feelings. Then he followed it with the line he'd clearly been saving. "I never really loved you." He watched my face like he was waiting for fireworks. That was what he wanted, a scene. Tears, a shaky voice, me pleading, him looking burdened and noble. He wanted the story he could tell later, how I lost it, how he had to protect his peace, how I was too emotional. So I did the one thing that shattered his rhythm. I nodded. I set my fork down. I smoothed my napkin against my lap. I even took a sip of water, slow and controlled, because I refused to let my hands shake in front of him. "Okay," I said. His eyebrows lifted. "Okay?" "Yes." I met his eyes with an almost polite calm. "Then you should leave." It was subtle, but I saw it. His mouth tightened for half a second. Confusion, not relief. Confusion. Like a man who practiced a speech in the mirror for weeks and suddenly realized the audience wasn't reacting at the right parts. He tried again, like he could press a different button and trigger the response he wanted. "You're not going to say anything?" I leaned back slightly and kept my voice gentle, almost clinical. "What is there to say? You've made your choice." He opened his mouth, then closed it. I could see him recalculating. People like Mark don't know what to do with silence. Silence doesn't give them anything to twist later. And that's when it clicked for me. This wasn't spontaneous. This had timing. He picked our anniversary on purpose. He wore that blazer on purpose. He made sure our daughter, Rachel, was away for the weekend on purpose. He'd carved out an empty house so he could leave cleanly, without witnesses, without complications, which meant he didn't just plan to leave. He planned to take. He finished his meal anyway. That part almost impressed me, the discipline of someone who believes the ending belongs to him. He even dabbed his mouth with his napkin and asked the server for the check like we were still a normal couple. When the bill arrived, he didn't reach for it. He just watched me. Another test, another trap. If I paid, he could later say I was trying to buy him. If I refused, he could call me bitter. I slid my card into the folder without blinking. Not because I wanted to, because I wanted the moment to end on my terms, not his. In the car ride home, he hummed under his breath like someone walking out of a meeting they'd already won. When we pulled into the driveway, he didn't even look at the house the way you look at something you're leaving. He looked at it like a prize he'd already divided in his head. Inside, he turned into a teenager in a tantrum, packing loudly, slamming drawers, making passive-aggressive calls on speakerphone so I could hear the laugh in his voice when his ex-girlfriend said something funny. Her laugh was higher than I expected, too bright, like a woman trying to prove she still mattered. I stood in the hallway and watched him move through our home as if he were filming an exit scene for a made-for-TV movie. He dragged a suitcase behind him, then paused at the front door and finally delivered the line he'd been polishing all night. "I guess I'll finally get half of everything." He said it slowly, letting each word land, expecting me to flinch. I didn't answer. I leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms folded loosely, and watched him stare at me, trying to provoke something. Anger, sadness, fear. What he got was nothing. That's what made his eyes narrow. He didn't understand that I wasn't numb. I was finished. He left without slamming the door. That part mattered. People who slam doors want attention. Mark wanted control. He wanted it to look clean, mature, mutual. He wanted to be able to say he handled it calmly. The door clicked shut, and the house became quiet in a way that felt almost unfamiliar. Not peaceful, exactly. More like when an appliance finally turns off and you realize how loud it was the whole time. I waited, not out of heartbreak, out of habit. 13 seconds after the tires crunched over gravel, I walked to my study. This wasn't an emotional impulse. It was procedure. 7 years ago, after watching my friend get stripped down to nothing in a divorce he never saw coming, house, savings, retirement, he called me crying from a studio apartment that smelled like cheap detergent and regret. "How did it happen so fast?" he asked. I remember staring at my kitchen counter that day, listening to his voice crack, and feeling something settle inside me. Not fear, clarity. Love is not a contract, marriage is. And contracts can be engineered. Mark thought I was obsessive with paperwork because I was old school, because I liked control, because I was boring. That was his favorite word for me. Boring, predictable, safe. He didn't realize he was describing a fortress. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a small black lockbox I hadn't touched in years. The metal was cool under my fingertips, like it had been waiting. Inside were 4 things: a USB drive, notarized documents, the fully executed postnuptial agreement, and a sealed envelope labeled in my handwriting, Activation, Clause 7. I set everything on the desk, turned on the lamp, and watched the warm light spill over paper that had once felt paranoid and now felt inevitable. Clause 7 was simple on the surface: spousal abandonment trigger. Mark had signed it. So had I. He'd laughed at the notary that day like it was a joke, like I was being dramatic. "Eula watches too many legal shows," he told the woman with a grin. I let him believe that. I slid the envelope open and read the sentence I already knew by heart. The wording mattered. Intent mattered. Timing mattered. I picked up a pen and wrote in clean, steady ink. Spouse Mark Anderson has voluntarily vacated the shared residence with intent to end the marriage. Date, signature. Then I opened my laptop. Boot sequence, local encryption, biometric confirmation. The screen lit up like it had rehearsed this moment. In a way, it had. I navigated to the private file directory, the asset tree I'd built over years. Every account, every entity, every holding structure, all legal, all documented, all designed to respond like a nervous system when a certain nerve was pinched. And there it was. Clause 7, trigger, spousal abandonment. My cursor hovered over the word execute. This was the part people misunderstand. They think preparation means obsession, or bitterness, or paranoia. But it wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was architecture. Mark thought he was walking out with half of everything. What he didn't realize was that the moment he left, he stopped being a partner and became a third party. And third parties don't get access to the vault. I clicked. A green progress bar slid silently across the screen, smooth as breath. No music, no drama. Just the quiet sound of a life-changing shape. By the time his car disappeared down the street, the house was already reassigned. Accounts were already isolated. Beneficiaries already updated. Access already revoked. He could still log into Netflix. I left him that. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, listening to the new silence of my home. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. Tomorrow Mark would try to draw blood. Tomorrow he would call a lawyer. Tomorrow he would start telling people his version, the version where he was brave and I was blindsided. But tomorrow he would learn something he should have learned long ago. He wasn't leaving me. He was leaving the perimeter I controlled, and the gates had already closed behind him. I slept better than I expected that night. Not deeply, not peacefully, but without the weight I'd grown used to carrying, like a coat you don't realize is heavy until you finally take it off. The house was quiet in a way that felt intentional, not abandoned. Every clock ticked, every floorboard settled. Nothing demanded anything from me. At 6:12 a.m. I made coffee. At 6:14 my phone vibrated. It wasn't a message, it wasn't a call. It was an alert. Years ago, when I was still consulting in risk auditing, I'd set up a private monitoring tool, originally to flag corporate mentions, reputational risks, unusual activity patterns. Old habits don't disappear just because you retire. You just forget they're there until they wake up. I'd left Mark's name on the watch list, not out of jealousy, out of habit. The alert opened to a public social media post. There he was, Mark, arm draped around her. The ex-girlfriend he claimed was his future, both of them holding champagne flutes, faces pressed too close together, smiling like they were reclaiming something stolen. The caption read, "True love always finds its way back, finally free." I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt interest. My eyes went straight to the timestamp. Posted yesterday at 4:27 p.m. I checked the date again. Yesterday, 3 hours before our anniversary dinner. 3 hours before grilled salmon and lemon butter. 3 hours before he sat across from me, folded his hands, and said he'd never really loved me. which meant something very important. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a man stumbling into old feelings. This was premeditated abandonment. And premeditation changes everything. I zoomed in on the image, not their faces, the metadata, location services embedded in the upload, device model, time zone alignment. GPS coordinates matched a rooftop bar downtown, the same one Mark once said was too loud when I suggested it for my birthday. I opened the postnuptial agreement. Clause 9b. Premeditated abandonment with intent to defraud the spousal trustee. We added it after my lawyer asked one question during negotiations years ago. What if one spouse stays just long enough to cash out? Mark had laughed then, too. Said I was dramatic. Said love didn't work like that. Love doesn't, but strategy does. Clause 9b required proof of intent before marital departure. Evidence of alternate romantic engagement, concealed communications, or public declarations that predated the separation. A time-stamped photo with an ex-girlfriend? That wasn't just evidence. That was a signature. I downloaded the image, extracted the metadata, confirmed the GPS coordinates, uploaded the full report to my asset protection log. Violation confirmed. What Mark thought was a celebration was actually a confession. I forwarded the file to my attorney with one line in the subject field. Clause 9b activation. No message body. He didn't need one. At 9:03 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Downtown prefix. I let it ring twice before answering. Ms. Anderson? The voice was young, polished, confident in a way that only exists before someone realizes they're out of their depth. This is Kyle Benton, attorney representing your husband, Mark Anderson. I wanted to reach out before proceeding with formal filings. Of course he did. We'll be filing for divorce based on irreconcilable differences, he continued. Naturally, my client is entitled to an equitable division of marital assets. We'll be seeking his share of the primary residence, brokerage accounts, and jointly held vehicles. There it was, the assumption. He spoke like I was stunned, like I was cornered, like I'd be grateful for his professional courtesy. I suggest you have your counsel contact me, he added. It'll make this smoother. Avoid unnecessary conflict. I took a sip of coffee. Go ahead, I said calmly. There was a pause. He'd expected resistance, or confusion, or questions. Instead, I opened my email. Attached 3 documents. The fully executed post-nuptial agreement. The trust structure schematic. The Clause 9b activation packet with metadata evidence. Subject line. Anderson v. Anderson. Preliminary materials. No greeting, no signature. I clicked send. The silence on the line stretched. Ms. Anderson, he said finally, and his voice had changed. Thinner, tighter. I'll need to review these. You should, I replied, carefully. Click. 6 minutes later, my phone rang again. Same number. This time I answered immediately. Ms. Anderson, he said, and the confidence was gone. I've spoken with my client. He claims he was unaware of the post-nuptial agreement's enforcement mechanisms. He did not disclose any trust structures. No, I said, he wouldn't have. Another pause. Papers shuffling. Someone else speaking quietly in the background. This changes the landscape significantly, Kyle admitted. The time-stamped post, the premeditation clause, this may require internal review. That's wise. Then he said the sentence I'd been waiting for. My God, what did he tell you yesterday? I smiled. He told me the truth. Click. By noon, the email had been opened 7 times. Forwarded 3. Accessed once from a mobile device. Standard legal triage. I pictured Mark somewhere, probably at a cafe with her, watching his phone buzz while his lawyer read aloud clauses he'd once mocked. I imagined his face tightening with each paragraph. The slow realization that the boring woman he underestimated had already locked down the battlefield. I didn't need to imagine long. At 12:43 p.m., Mark walked into the bank. I knew because I'd already spoken to the branch manager earlier that morning. Robert was a kind man, methodical, unflappable, the kind of professional who never raised his voice but never bent his spine either. Mark approached the counter with confidence, the kind that comes from believing money obeys familiarity. I'd like to withdraw from our joint savings, he said, sliding his ID across the counter, and transfer half into my new account. The teller typed, paused, typed again. I'm sorry, sir, she said carefully. Your name is no longer associated with that account. Mark laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. That's impossible. We've been with this bank for 15 years. She swallowed. 1 moment, please. Robert appeared minutes later with a thin file in his hand. Mr. Anderson, he said gently, please come with me. Behind closed doors, Mark's world started shrinking. Robert laid out the documents. Beneficiary reassignment. Account isolation. Trust directives triggered by spousal abandonment and premeditated breach. Mark stared at the pages like they were written in a foreign language. There's been a mistake, he said. I need that money. Robert pointed to the signature. His signature. Dated years ago. Witnessed. Notarized. I'm sorry, Robert said. There's nothing I can release. Mark left without shouting, without slamming anything. He walked back through the lobby slowly, his shoulders tight, his jaw clenched, sunglasses already on to hide the panic rising behind his eyes. By the time he reached his car, the story he'd been telling himself, that this was a clean break, a fair split, a new beginning, had started to collapse. And this was still only the second move, because money isn't the first thing people lose when their plan fails. It's certainty, and Mark had just lost all of it. By mid-afternoon, Mark stopped pretending everything was under control. The bank had blindsided him. His lawyer had stopped returning calls, and the confidence he'd borrowed from his ex-girlfriend began leaking out through the cracks. I didn't need updates. The system sent them anyway. Account access attempts logged and denied. Password resets flagged and blocked. Two-factor authentication failures recorded. He tried 3 times before giving up. At 3:17 p.m., he drove to the apartment, the one he'd shown off to me weeks earlier without realizing it. Modern building, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of place meant to signal a fresh start. A yellow notice was taped neatly to the door. Lease terminated, vacate in 48 hours. Mark tore it down like it had personally insulted him. He stood there in the hallway, rereading it, his mouth opening and closing as if the words might rearrange themselves. The notice wasn't from the landlord. It was issued by Ashford Properties, LLC. Asset manager, E. Anderson. He called the property manager in a panic. I could almost hear it, the forced calm, the entitlement masked as confusion. I live here, he said. There has to be a mistake. There wasn't. The building belonged to a holding entity, under my trust. Mark had never asked. His ex-girlfriend never told him. They'd assumed ownership was irrelevant as long as rent cleared. Assumptions are expensive. When he got off the phone, she was standing behind him, arms crossed, eyes darting. You didn't say your wife owned the building, she snapped. I didn't know, Mark replied. And that was the moment the fantasy cracked. She stepped back, not toward him, but away, toward the kitchen, toward her phone, toward distance. People who run toward chaos rarely stick around for consequences. By evening, she was already less affectionate, less invested. By night, she was too tired to talk. Mark slept on the couch. The next call came after midnight. It was Rachel. Her voice was cautious, not angry. That mattered. Mom, she said, Dad says you froze his accounts. I didn't correct her wording. He says you planned this for years. I planned for risk, I replied. Silence. She was standing at a crossroads. I could hear it in her breathing. The part of her that wanted peace wrestling with the part that wanted truth. He says you're trying to ruin him. I opened the thinner folder on my desk, the one I'd prepared long ago for this exact conversation. Section 12, I said. What? Section 12 of the postnuptial, the clause about forfeiture in cases of active deceit. It's in your Dropbox. Pause. You put it there 3 years ago, I added gently, in the same folder as your student loan breakdown. Another pause. I need to know if he's lying, she whispered. Then don't listen to me, I said. Check his phone. Start with August. The line went quiet. I knew, she said eventually. I know. She hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, my inbox held a single email from her university account. Subject, I read it. Attached, screenshots. Messages between Mark and his ex-girlfriend. Plans. Jokes. Dates arranged while we were still married. A message that made my chest tighten despite everything. I'll stay calm until I cash out. She never reads the paperwork anyway. Rachel didn't text, didn't call. She didn't need to. By afternoon, Mark had called her 6 times. Then 9. Then left a voicemail I never heard but could imagine, pleading wrapped in indignation. She changed her voicemail greeting the next day. Hi, you've reached Rachel Anderson. Leave a message. No nickname. Just her name. Mark lost more than money that week. He lost his witness. By Friday, his ex-girlfriend was gone, packed up, left a note on the counter about needing space. He reread it twice, like it might apologize if he stared long enough. That evening, there was a knock on his door. A process server. Thick envelope, real paper, real ink. The plaintiff, Eula Anderson. The charge, intentional interference with a trust asset. Mark called me. I didn't answer. He texted, "Please, we need to talk." I let the message sit unread. Because when someone finally understands they miscalculated, the last thing you give them is an audience. This wasn't about revenge. It was about correction. And Mark's escape plan had officially collapsed. Mark asked for the meeting like he still had leverage. "Tell her I want to see her in person," he told my lawyer. "She owes me that." Owes. That word again. As if 15 years of quiet labor, of stability, of patience, of cleaning up messes he never noticed, were some unfinished debt on my end. I said yes, not because he deserved closure, because he needed an audience. We met downtown in a neutral building. 3rd floor, glass walls, a conference room designed to make everyone feel equally exposed. Long walnut table, no art on the walls, no comfort, just space and fluorescent honesty. His lawyer didn't come. He'd already recused himself after realizing exactly how outmatched this situation was. No one likes standing in a room when the iceberg finally surfaces. I arrived 5 minutes early. Mark arrived 9 minutes late. Sunglasses indoors. Dark jacket buttoned too tightly. He looked thinner, sharper around the eyes. The confidence he once wore like armor had been sanded down to brittle defiance. "Nice place," he said, sitting without greeting. I slid the folder across the table. He didn't touch it. "What's this?" he asked, irritation rising already. "Your life," I said, "on paper." He scoffed and opened it, expecting noise. Instead, he found silence in print. Exhibit A, the social media post, time-stamped, geolocated. Exhibit B, transcripts of messages, flirtation while still married, jokes about playing it smart. Exhibit C, audio, his voice, laughing with a friend, saying, "She never reads the paperwork anyway." His hand froze. "You recorded me?" he snapped. "No," I replied calmly. "Your friend did. Turns out betrayal doesn't come with loyalty programs." The color drained from his face. Then came the clause. I'd highlighted it for him. Section 14B. Any attempt to emotionally coerce, manipulate, or intentionally deceive the grantor for financial gain will result in the total forfeiture of all marital and trust asset claims. He read it once, then again, then a third time, slower. "This is insane," he said hoarsely. "No," I replied, "it's notarized." His voice cracked. "You can't just erase me like this." "I didn't erase you," I said evenly. "You wrote yourself out of the ledger. I just closed the book." He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "You think this makes you strong?" I shook my head. "No, it makes me free." He flipped through the remaining pages. Automatic liquidations, clawbacks, administrative dissolutions. Systems he'd never bothered to understand because he assumed the outcome would always bend in his favor. "You planned all of this to trap me." "You never looked," I said. "You were too focused on what you deserved to notice what was protected." Silence swallowed the room. For the first time since I'd known him, Mark had nothing to say. No argument, no charm, no angle. Just the quiet aftermath of a plan that collapsed under its own arrogance. He stood abruptly, chair scraping back. "I hope you're proud of this." I nodded. "I am." He paused at the door, almost said something, almost tried one last manipulation. Then he left. No goodbye. No performance. Just the echo of footsteps in a hallway that didn't belong to him anymore. The envelope arrived the following Tuesday. No courier, no signature required. Just a plain white packet in his mailbox like any other piece of suburban noise. Inside were 2 documents. The first, notification of irrevocable dissolution of private marital trust authority. The second, executed transfer of all nullified marital claims. No judge's name, no courtroom, no appeal. Because this had never needed the courts. The end had been built into the beginning. Effective as of the moment you stated you never loved me. That was the line. By then, everything else was already gone. The apartment reclaimed. The lawsuit active. The ex-girlfriend vanished. Rachel silent. Mark sat alone in a kitchen that wasn't his anymore, rereading the words like they might soften if he stared long enough. He opened his phone and scrolled to the photo, the one with her, champagne raised, smiling like a victor. He hovered over delete, then stopped, because you don't delete a tombstone. I was at home when the confirmation came through. Trust dissolved, claims nullified, process complete. I stood by the window and watched the evening settle over the neighborhood. No music, no drama. Just the hum of a house that finally belonged to me. Mark thought he was the one leaving. What he never understood was this. I wasn't abandoned. I was released. And in the end, he didn't just lose a wife. He lost the story